just told you to put the week in the world behind you, and now I'm going to talk about it. So the new administration is assembling its cast with rapacious speed. The appointments are as comical and ominous as they were 8 years ago. In conversations at coffee shops and on subway platforms, in the dog park and at the playground, you can hear people wondering which of the many campaign promises will happen first and which are worth hoping might not happen at all. Of all of the many possibilities, everyone seems convinced that the most likely early action will be mass deportation of immigrants, probably because lies about migrants and refugees were the centerpiece of the campaign, and because anti-immigrant sentiment proved to be the most effective motivating force to get out the vote. As we know, anti-immigrant rhetoric and action has a long, proven track record in this country and has played a starring role in populist totalitarian movements worldwide. From the anti-Irish Know-Nothing Party of the 1850s in this country to the 21st century neo-fascists of Europe, anti-migrant slander is a go-to for those trying to seize power for their agenda. So well proven that it's almost a lazy move for aspiring autocrats. Once again, the Torah has relevant wisdom. Week after week, no matter what is going on in our world, we find the Torah speaking directly to us. This week's Parsha Vayeira has a series of seemingly unrelated episodes, but this year I see them telling a single sad story about our ancestor Abraham. I see them providing an extended meditation on how we treat the stranger. And I see them warning us of the costs of xenophobia, even to those not so susceptible to its allure. The Parsha opens on Abraham recovering from a painful wound, you might know about that, when three strangers approach. And he displays the audacious hospitality for which he has become known. Forever after, Abraham represents to our people chesed, loving kindness. Whenever his name is mentioned by the rabbis of the Midrash or the Talmud, they are invoking his example of hospitality, magnanimity, generosity, kindness, and love. All Jews are meant to model ourselves after him in this regard. Whenever the Kabbalists want to describe the spiritual quality of open-heartedness or loving kindness, they talk about Abraham, all because of how he behaves at the beginning of this week's Parsha. He runs to greet these three strangers. He bows to the ground before them. He invites them to rest under the shade of the trees. He runs to enlist his household to prepare food and water for them. He even washes their feet. But by the end of the Parsha, this same man, our ancestor, Abraham, is standing on a mountaintop, seemingly numb and close-hearted, with a knife gripped in his hand, his arm high over his head as he looks down on the exposed throat of his beloved son, ready to kill him. How is this the same man? How did Abraham's heart close so terribly from the beginning to the end of this Parsha? Let's look at what happens in between. In the second story of the Parsha, we find those same strangers approaching the evil towns of Sodom and Gomorrah, and God preparing to destroy those two towns. Abraham argues with God to save the lives of any innocent people that are to be found in these two sinful towns. But why does God want to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah? Now, the story that's come down to us is related to homosexuality and sodomy. It's actually where the word sodomy comes from. But the real story has to do with violence against strangers. Did you know this? The real story is that the people of Sodom believed in the exact opposite way of life from Abraham's example. When deciding whether to destroy the town, God says, I will go down there and I will see whether they've acted entirely according to the cry that has come to me. And if not, I'll know. In other words, God is considering destroying the towns because of a cry coming from the towns. And God is going to see whether it's really true that the people are behaving in the way that the cry would suggest, Well, what was this tsa'aka, this cry? Noting that the word tsa'akata is how it appears, technically it means her cry, Rashi quotes the Talmud in Sanhedrin 109b as to the real problem. The real problem of Sodom was that the culture had become so selfish, so hateful, so cruel to outsiders that it was utterly forbidden to share resources with strangers. According to the Talmud, when a stranger would come to Sodom, they had a practice. Every person in the town would write their name on a coin and give it to the stranger. That sounds nice. But then they, the people of the town, would refuse to either give or even sell that person bread, even though they had coins, until that person starved to death. At which point they would retrieve their coins because their names were written on them. The Talmud tells us that there was a young woman in Sodom who would secretly bring poor people, poor strangers, bread, hidden inside of a pitcher so no one would see that she was helping them because it was against the law to help them. And when the townspeople found out that she was doing this is according to the Talmud, they smeared her with honey and positioned her on a city wall until she died of hornet bites. It was her cry that was the cry that rose to God. So the sexual violence that the inhabitants of the town threatened against the strangers who visited Abraham was just one expression of a much larger sin, which was extreme inhospitality, enforced and violent xenophobia. So here we have a counter-example, a hyperbolic counter-example to Abraham's instinct, which was to welcome strangers, to care for them, to provide for them. And his example sets the standard for Judaism. When people we don't know show up where we live, we're supposed to run to greet them. We're supposed to make sure they have what they need and are comfortable. We're supposed to care for them. We're supposed to express welcome and kindness in the spirit of our ancestor Abraham. We're supposed to act with love. Sodom provides the dystopic opposite extreme. And if we were following the example of Sodom, we would act with greed and hatred and distrust and violence against those who come into our land. We would not want to share our resources, and we would punish people who offer strangers sanctuary. We would not care if they starved to death, and we would do everything we could to get them out. God's preference between these two choices is not subtle in the Torah. Sodom and Gomorrah end as a heap of smoking ruins. With those two polar opposites established, the Torah now moves to scenarios between the two in this parsha. In the third story in the parsha, Abraham moves south to live in the Negev, in an area controlled by a foreign king whom Abraham does not know. Coming from the region of Sodom, he naturally is afraid to be a stranger entering into an unknown kingdom. Will he be subject to violence? He finds that King Abimelech is perfectly willing to let him live unmolested in the land. Abimelech doesn't do anything to help Abraham, but he doesn't threaten him either. And after talking through some tensions over water wells, the two agree to live in the same region without harming one another and even make a pact to share the water. So between the love and the hate that were presented in the first two stories, we have a third option, which is harmless indifference, just coexistence, what could be called you do you. It's in the fourth story, the one we read every year on Rosh Hashanah, where we see Abraham change. We learned in last week's parsha that Abraham and Sarah had been unable to conceive a child. And Sarah had a maidservant named Hagar, whom she gave to him as a concubine so that he could have offspring. As if the Torah is trying to tell us something, Hagar's name means the stranger, or the one who dwells here but isn't from here. Hagar gave birth to Ishmael in the last parsha, Abraham's oldest son. And now in this parsha, Isaac is born to Sarah. Soon after Isaac's birth, Sarah sees Ishmael, quote unquote, playing, and demands that Abraham send Ishmael and Hagar away. What was this playing that led to the expulsion of half of the family? The rabbis want to know. Here are some of their ideas. Perhaps he was engaged in idolatry. Perhaps he was mocking his little brother. Perhaps he was quarreling with Isaac about their inheritance. Perhaps he was sporting with Isaac, taunting him and threatening him by shooting arrows at him when they were out in the field. But Abraham ibn Ezra says that we shouldn't read into the word playing. Ishmael according to Ibn Ezra, didn't do anything wrong. He was actually just playing with his younger brother on the day of the feast of his weaning. But seeing them play together, Sarah was jealous, according to Ibn Ezra, and threatened because Ishmael was so much bigger than her Isaac. Though they all disagree about why, the rabbis agree that Sarah is threatened by this presence in her home, a presence that in fear she decides is not kin, not us, but other, not of her own blood, foreign-born, different. And she imagines that Hagar and Ishmael are a threat to her legacy, to her own child's financial well-being, to Isaac's future prospects, to Isaac's God-given inheritance, and she wants them out. And she demands that Abraham send Hagar and Ishmael away. And the Torah tells us that Abraham, the paragon of welcome and love and kindness, is greatly distressed by this demand. And he goes to God in his distress. And God tells him not to worry, that Ishmael is going to end up being fine. So Abraham goes along with it. Abraham agrees to send the foreigner, the resident alien, his lover, and their son away. And we know that that decision changed him, because the very next morning, he expels Hagar and Ishmael into the desert without a single loving word, without an embrace, without a kiss, without even enough food and water to survive. I would like to argue that this is a turning point in Abraham's story, because after he sacrifices his first son, it's only a very small step to the sacrifice of his second son. When Abraham hears God's call to sacrifice Isaac, he does not delay even as much as he delayed before sending Ishmael away. In numb dissociation, he acts with alacrity. He leads Isaac 3 days walking to a mountain. He builds an altar. He ties his son to it. He unsheathes the knife. He raises it over his head, and it's only divine intervention that stops him from sacrificing his child. And after he comes down from that mountain, Abraham never again hears from God. He never again sees Sarah alive. He never again speaks to Isaac or Ishmael. This is a really sad story. And what I see here, and you'll tell me later what you see, what I see here is a man who began extraordinarily open-hearted, welcoming, loving, kind, but when surrounded by pressure to exile the foreign-born around him, he sent away his very own kin. And in the process, he learned to close his heart. And what I see here is that when we do that, when we send away the stranger, it doesn't just hurt the stranger. It doesn't just hurt the people we send away. It changes us too. We necessarily close our hearts to the intense suffering that we witness. We necessarily numb ourselves and harden ourselves. How else could we have woken up every day and gone through our lives as usual while children were in cages 6 years ago? And that process, it reduces our ability to be soft and gentle, to be loving and open and kind in all of our relationships. It reduces our capacity for everyday compassion, even when it comes to our own families and even when it comes to our own children. And so if everyone's right about their predictions, what's coming here is harmful not just to the targets of the new administration's gleeful rage. What's coming here is harmful to all of us who witness it, to all of us who are powerless to stop it. Torah clearly does not want us to become the people of Sodom and Gomorrah. Torah clearly wants us to be like Abraham was at the beginning of the Parsha, open and loving and generous and hospitable and kind. And that's who we want to be too. So what do we do if this is really coming? I think we look now for opportunities to keep our hearts soft and to keep our hearts open. I think we look now for opportunities to care for other human beings. Doesn't really matter who. Whether they're refugees or migrants or asylum seekers or homeless people or hungry people or anyone who's suffering. We can do that through the Refugee Task Force here in our congregation or one of the aid societies that has been organized and emerged here in this congregation supporting refugee families. When our hearts are in danger of closing, one strategy is to proactively keep them open, to make added effort to soften, to reach out, to be kind. We could do that with the members of this community here who are ill or who are facing surgery or who are lonely. That's through chesed. We call it chesed after Abraham. We could do that with our neighbors. We could do that with our friends. We could do that, yes, with our own families. When this kind of terrible cruelty comes to our world, we must pay attention not only to the people around us, but also to the state of our own hearts, to the ways our own hearts are hurting. We must offer ourselves the love and the nurturance that we need to stay soft, to stay gentle, to stay loving, to stay human. When it's necessary, some of us might look for ways to physically protect people with our own bodies, to prevent harm. We'll see when we get there. But no matter what, we must not panic. I know this, what I've said here is dark, and I opened the service by saying you can leave it all behind. I'm so sorry. We must not allow fear to harden us. We must stay calm and clear-eyed and connected to one another. We are going to live through this together. And I, for one, would like to do so with as much love and care, sensitivity and compassion as we can, for ourselves and for our loved ones and for people we've never met who are part of our community and for people we've never met who are in harm's way. And if we do that, we will be living the best that Abraham's example has to offer. Shabbat Shalom.